Okay. So, bottom line is that we're not going to go through downward and upward motion. We went through that already. What we wanted to know was the Chumash source for downward motion, and we talked about. It says in the Gemara, it talks about the term klal, which means the general principle. When we have a prat, obviously, if somebody's pushing 3 times their body weight, they're absolutely liable, Aiden. So it was a point well brought up. But generally, there's still liability when gravity is going to add to the component. And Shmuel said, how do we know this from a pasuk? Because it says in Bamidbar chapter 35, verse 23, and he shall cause the object to fall down on him, and he died. And he is not sentenced to exile unless it fell in a way that things customarily fall. How do things fall? From a downward motion of gravity. So because that is a factor that contributes to the fact that somebody can lose control, because if a rope slips from your hand, it's not going to remain static. If you're pushing something up and you can't function anymore, you can at least hold it in a stationary position. Where's this found? By the Rambam, Maimonides in Hiltzah Rotzeach, chapter 6, verse 12. Because it's common, as he says, for descending objects to cause damage, because it's the nature of heavy objects to fall quickly. And therefore, you have to be extra careful. Okay. So now that we've got this particular issue sorted out, the Gemara goes in and says, right, we've covered both Shmuel's biblical sourcing. We also covered the logic from the Rambam. And the Gemara says, look, we have to bring a brisa, and there are 2 different terms used by the Torah to describe the type of accidental killing for which exile is decreed. And the first occurred in Bamidbar chapter 35, but in verse 15, not in verse 23. 23 talks about the culpability. So when are you basically not culpable to be exiled? And the first one is when it mentions the word bishgaga, inadvertently. And what does that come to mean? We're going to see now. So the first one, obviously, is by Midbar chapter 35, verse 15. Sorry, I've got this snake with fur, this cat. And the second passage is in Devarim, chapter 19, verse 4, which it uses this word bivli da'at, which means without awareness. So in English, when you use an inadvertent or without awareness, well, if you kill inadvertently, you aren't aware. So we have to go actually into the Aramaic and see what the term means and how they differ, not from an English perspective, but from the original language. So the rabbis taught in the Brisa that when it uses this word bishgaga, it says it excludes one who kills deliberately. What does it mean, a deliberate killing? If you are fully aware of the crime and you have a disregard for the law, meaning you're aware of what you're doing and you know that it contravenes the law, then that's deliberate. In comparison to inadvertent, which excludes one who murdered intentionally. So the Gemara, as we mentioned, as Simpson mentioned last time, is, well, it can't be stating the obvious because otherwise you wouldn't need it stated. So that was a very relevant point. But Tosfot said, well, you could think that it goes into the obvious because if you look at a premeditated murder, what happens in that particular case is he stabs the victim in a place where a father and son are having coffee, as an example, because you can't have relatives joining as witnesses in a homicide case because they're biased and there's a relationship. So the minute there's a relationship between the witnesses or one of the witnesses with the plaintiff and defendant in that particular case, um, we know that that the murderer is waiting for a particular opportunity where he couldn't be tried based on a technicality. The other one is if within a second said, I'm not happy about you. You slept with my wife and you took half my funds, and I want to kill you. And he quickly stabs him before the other two have a chance to say, you can't do that. They're still processing, they're in shock. So Tosfot says in that particular case, you might think that that person can go into the city of exile. You have to be told that they can't for a deliberate murder because it's still a form of punishment. But then what Tosfot brings there is it's not a form of punishment because the city of exile is known as the city of refuge, which means, Aidan, why are you off camera, by the way?
Oh, sorry, my friend's also in the like the next room. He's busy playing the piano, so I don't want to like
Oh,
disturb you.
no, it's not going to disturb me. It's not going to bring up his sound. I'm not looking at him. The only time that it
Oh,
was a problem once was when Arthur's daughter in summer went through a bikini, and that was the one shear that the rabbi happened to wash.
actually,
Can you believe it? The most Haredi rabbi, he listened to the shir, and then this teenage girl comes across with a bikini. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Listen, I wouldn't come out in a bikini." He said, "Well, thank goodness for that." So anyway,
It
uh,
wasn't a
God,
bikini, it was a
I actually
bra.
thought I was in the wrong shirt.
no, no. So anyway, let's get back to. So Aidan, you can come on the camera with pleasure. It's just nice that
yeah.
everybody shares.
Sorry,
Okay.
I just didn't want to like disturb
No,
like
no,
the
that's sweet
lecture.
of you. That's sweet of you. So what we are saying is here is Tosfot said you might think of it as a punishment going to the city of exile, but it's actually a city of refuge, meaning it protects you from the Goel Adam, the relatives' victims, and you get protection. And it's a kapora, means it's an atonement, so it's two in one. So it's not as much of a punishment as you think. And for premeditation, two things will happen. Is if the Sanhedrin know that it's premeditated, not that the person's off on a technicality when they're not sure, they will give him the barley treatment, meaning they will starve him of liquid and food and then make sure he has barley and copious amount of liquids until his stomach bursts. In the event that it doesn't even fall within that level of premeditation and he stabs him, but he doesn't declare premeditatedly that he has enmity for this person, then they'll let him go, and then the victim's relatives are entitled to kill him. So that's what Tosfot brings. That's quite interesting, but you have to go through the Tosfot. So it's not the Mefurish, and thank goodness for Rav Simcha Steinauer brought that to my attention. Now, as far as what sort of chidush this brings, as Gavin Simpson said, what do you mean to tell me? The Gemara says from the Brisa that a deliberate murder doesn't go to exile. Of course, he doesn't go to exile. He's liable to execution. Okay. So if he's liable to execution, what are you telling me that that's unique? If you want to contrast inadvertent to somebody that does it deliberately, we know somebody is deliberate gets the death penalty. What are you trying to add here? So the Gemara says, look, if you have a look, there's this case with Rabbah and Abaya. They have a conversation with each other. So Rabbah said that in a case, um, if you look, if the Rabbah is holding in a case of the reason why you don't go to the city of refuge is that you're bordering on deliberate. But Abaya holds that the crime itself does not warrant. Um, just let me get the cat off. Cat, get off, please. Okay. Um, so, none of this. I've got a snake with fur here. You should try waking up to this thing at 3 a.m. It's horrendous. Go away. No, Saul. Hang on, guys. One sec. Last time you rebooted the computer. Go away. Go sit elsewhere. No, go on. Go on. Go, sorry. All right. Um, um, Gavin, you've also got dogs, so you know. Um, so where was I? Okay, so a buyer's view is on this case with almost inadvertently, he said that this particular person is uh, ignorant and therefore he doesn't deserve to go to the city of refuge because he's ignorant. He didn't know it was forbidden and therefore it's not permitted, but he doesn't deserve to go to the city of refuge, nor does he deserve to be persecuted by the Goel Adam, the family's relatives. And Rabbah's saying, how can you say that? According to Rabbah, a person that is ignorant doesn't deserve to be treated as accidental. In fact, he uses the term mazid, is that it's bordering on such gross negligence, the ignorance, that it in fact is almost a deliberate murder. It might not be premeditated, but it's certainly deliberate. So Rabbah is saying it's virtually deliberate, and Abaya is saying that ignorance is a legitimate excuse. So one thing to bear in mind is that you could say, how could you see fit for both positions? So let's just examine what the positions are. Number one, a complete accident. On the other end of the spectrum, you have, I can't even take this seriously with this creature. You have deliberate premeditated murder. Okay. And then you've got two levels in between. You've got negligent, but negligent in the case of there was not only no premeditation, but maybe perhaps there was almost bordering on innocence, but certainly the negligence is enough to warrant one going to the city of refuge. And then you've got negligence bordering on almost deliberate, although it wasn't premeditated, it is grossly negligent. So you've got those four issues on the spectrum. Now, what this particular Gemara does is it said that those that are not eligible for the city of refuge are one on either side of the spectrum. So what's on the side that it's almost a complete accident, but there is and you've got the other hand where it's almost so grossly negligent. So the only people that are allowed to go to the city of exile are those that are negligent, but certainly haven't had a history of criminality or inconsideration. So we were discussing last time, how could Abaya look for a case of innocence when there's ignorance? Because I said, if you look at the art scroll, when we do the vidoy in Yom Kippur, it says that ignorance of the halacha is no excuse, because if you choose to live in an ignorant state, you're held culpable for the responsibility that you fail to take on. So you could say that's not fair. So let me just tell you an important Jewish principle is that people say, why would God punish this person? It's not a punishment, it's called consequential. If in high school you basically having sex with every rugby player and you turn out pregnant, well, gee whiz, it was such a shock if you didn't have protected sex. It was such a shock, and it's a punishment from God. No, it's not. It's a consequence. It's a consequence for stupidity. So consequences are a result of not planning properly, and consequences are accumulation of behaviors, which are habits. And in being neglectful in a relationship on a day in, day out basis, where you make everybody a priority except for your spouse, will result in her either having an affair or leaving you, or the relationship not having much quality to it. So they daily, what do you call it? Daily neglect or daily attendance is what creates a long-term consequence. So let's just give you an idea here as far as accidental. Now, there are two forms at which you can have an accidental, let's just call it a state of unawareness. The first one is you've got, I think I mentioned this before. Everybody thinks that they're going to be a Pinchas, this Oaksa Bolsheva, okay? And he reads all of a sudden in Shemot chapter 35, verse 2, that it's Chayiv Misa for somebody that breaks Shabbos. And he sees somebody breaking Shabbos, not in an accidental way, but flauntingly deciding to light fires on Shabbos and do all sorts of things. And he figures that if he does a Pinchas and nips it in the bud, nobody else is going to break Shabbos. So what does he think? He thinks that the Torah condones it and that it is an acceptable moral condition. But there's ignorance there because he hasn't read the oral Torah. So in that particular case, Abaya is turning around to say that he's equivalent to one who committed it accidentally. Meaning, there was certainly no criminal intent. There was pure ignorance there. And basically, Rabbah is saying It doesn't matter. You can't just go around killing people. So that's certainly the fact. And then we say let's use a slightly more modern example. And that modern example is I sent you guys articles about the current status of law in Canada, at which they feel they're very progressive. So you've got medical assistance in dying. And the bottom line of it is that all of the older people, people that can't economically sustain, and the country doesn't want to look after them, they give them enthusiastic assistance in dying, not only if they're terminal, but if they are a drain to society, which is very similar to the Romans. And who thought in the 21st century Canada would do this? So say you've got a doctor that's been living under this legality for 10 years in Canada, and he comes to the um, to France, not France. France is a bad example. He comes to South Africa and he decides, without the due protocol, to end a terminally ill patient life by giving him excess amount of morphine because he's suffering. Then, in that particular case, he has committed a homicide. Whether or not the courts will find him guilty, there might be mitigating circumstances in terms of his compassion. But the point of it is that's a modern day example of how ignorance can take place. It's not somebody that thinks murder is just allowed. So I hope those two examples are helpful for you. And then we need to discuss this other case quickly, and then I'm going to go through the opposite opinion. So that was Bishgaga in a state of unawareness, and the Gemara teaches, Bishgaga inadvertently, and then Bilvi Da'at is a term without awareness. So what does an unawareness mean? It means, according to Rabbah, and Rabbah does not hold like Abaya, he holds full culpability, that a person is excluded from exile with the following types of intentional killings. A person who intended to kill an animal and mistakenly killed a human being. Okay? He was maybe in the forest and hunting, and some person decided that that was great picnic territory, and he didn't get a gazelle, he got a human being. Or one who intended to kill a kutat. Kevin, you know how to pronounce it. I don't know. I mean, I've always read the Chumash, and basically, it was a non-Jewish
Kuti.
tribe. Kuti. Okay, so kutat
Kuti.
is
Kutim.
basically, I get that, but the Gemara uses the term plural kutats. So it's one kuti, many kutats.
In English. Yeah.
In
Yeah.
English. Okay.
Yeah.
But basically, you know the story. There was an Assyrian king from Kuta during the latter days of the first temple. He settled in Samaria. He wanted to replace the 10 tribes of Israel. They'd been basically exiled to Assyria. And it's forbidden to kill them, but they certainly wouldn't kill a Jew for killing one of them, meaning a murder of non-Jewish nations is not condoned, but the Jews aren't going to turn on Jews if it happens to go south for one of these nations. Okay, so basically, if you intended to kill a Kutat, but instead you killed a Jew, the Sanhedrin isn't going to put you to death. Whether or not their legal system is a different case. Now, this is a tricky one. If you intended to kill a non-viable infant, but killed instead a fully developed infant, and you might say, well, this is ridiculous. But I mean, I've been watching Charlie Kirk and various people on college campuses, and they're saying it's a clump of cells, and the mother has no responsibility. But basically, an infant, if you're dealing with an infant born in the 8th month of pregnancy or before the 7th month, it's assumed to be non-viable, because in those days you never had respiratory machines and you never had incubators, etc. So you've got to look at a pre-technology time. So before the 7th month, the baby wouldn't have survived. And killing, therefore, is not a capital offense. But you didn't realize when you went in that, in fact, this was a fully developed fetus. Either the mother was eating like a horse, or genetically that kid seemed to develop quicker than in most cases. So Rabbah's saying in all those cases, although intended to kill, the killing which he actually committed was unintentional. And be that as it may, although Abaya is saying that because it was unintentional and it didn't fall within the halachic parameters, therefore you don't go to the city of exile simply because it's not considered killing um, directly what you wanted to kill, but in fact, um, it exonerates you from the victim's relatives from getting vengeance, and you deemed innocent, and you don't even go to the city of refuge. Rabbah is turning around and saying, no, it's not the point. When there's an intention to kill, and that intent is there, it doesn't matter whether it turned out to be a Jew instead of a Kutat, or it was an animal instead of a person. The mere intention to kill makes it close to deliberate, and therefore they don't deserve it's karov lemazid, and therefore they don't deserve protection by going into the city of exile. Now I spoke to Rav Simcha Steinhauer because he was basically bringing two legal terms, and he was discussing this issue of actus rea, which is the unlawful act, and mens rea, which is criminal intent. And I'm going to go through the South African law system with you. But my question to Simcha Steinhauer was quite straightforward. And I'm sure Gavin Simpson would be thinking along the same lines as me. Do you want to really tell me that if you intended to kill an animal, which is completely permitted for kashrut purposes, and you accidentally killed a human, that you would be so on the borderline of deliberate that you're not entitled to the protection of the city of refuge? Do you really want to stretch it that far? Because it doesn't make sense. Abaya's position there makes sense, but Abaya's position with the term bishgaga inadvertently was too merciful because ignorance is no excuse. So in the second case, I go with Abaya. In the first case, I go with Rabbah. Gavin Simpson, is that the sort of question you would ask? You've done Makkos, same as me. Okay. So it didn't make any sense. So sometimes you've got to stretch yourself to where you can hold by different opinions. But he said he couldn't get back to me, so I just wanted to explain to you what it means. Okay. So um, so you have actus rea, and that's the actual physical component of the crime. So it's the unlawful killing of another human being. Okay. In murder or culpable homicide, this means causing the death of a person by an act or an omission. What do we mean by an omission? Anybody care to guess? Guys? Anybody?
Something was left out. In terms of the process, in terms of the
No.
actual
Omission, I'm pleased you asked. Omission is the failure to prevent a death. So
uh,
you can be held liable both for causing death and failure to prevent it. In other words, gross negligence.
negligence. Yeah.
You never went through a safety procedure with you've got check safety on construction sites and a myriad of other procedures, or you stood by while another person was beaten to death and you were armed enough to protect that victim. Okay? So it's actually causing the actor failure to act. That's what we mean by. So it's the physical component of the crime, the actual unlawful act itself. Then you got mens rea, and by the way, I must credit you, Rachlin's sister, that sat down with me and explained to me these terms, because she helped you, Rachlin, prepare for his various bar exams, etc. So mens rea is it's the fault element, basically. It's the criminal intent. So it's the mental state of the accused. Let's forget about American terms of manslaughter, etc. We're just focusing on South African law. Okay? So you've still got degrees of murder. So you're dealing with intent versus negligence, basically. And the more intentional a crime is, so for example, premeditation, and the more negligent you are in failing to prevent somebody from dying on a construction site, they've got different sorts of results of punishments. We also said that intent of premeditation is different. And even in the Gemara, even though it generally doesn't deal with premeditation versus on the spur killing. There is this term that you've come across somebody suddenly as opposed to waiting in ambush. So what does that mean? If you waiting in ambush, it's premeditation. If suddenly you walked into somebody and you have a knife, there's no premeditation. So that does affect things to a certain degree. We always use a classic example. Is if a man is having an affair with a woman and convinces this woman to take out a life insurance policy on the husband, and the husband's in his 50s and this toy boy is in his like 20s, and he's dead broke and he's gotten the wife smitten and said, listen, honey, let's end off with a couple of $1 million. I'm having the time of my life. Your husband's such a drag. Then obviously the courts are not going to look too fondly on his premeditation because this poor sop works 12 hours a day for her and the kids. If a husband comes home and he sees his wife having an affair and he snaps and kills the person she's having adultery with and the wife, the court will go a little bit more mercifully on him. It doesn't mean he'll get off. It just means that certainly it's a mitigating factor. So, one thing you've got to realize is as far as intentional unlawful killing, which is murder, the mens rea, the dolus, okay, there's three different types of intention. So dolus directus, that's direct intention. What does that mean? The accused meant to kill. Dolus indirectus, the accused foresaw death as a certain consequence of the act but proceeded anyway. Meaning there's a difference between beating somebody half your size and not stopping, where it's a dolus indirectus to a certain degree, compared to emptying out a 45 caliber at close range and having a spare gun. You get what I'm saying? The indirectors would probably result in death. You can't guarantee it. Certainly the guy will be sucking through a straw and in a wheelchair for perhaps, but you don't know it's going to end in death. But there's certainly intent to do grievous bodily harm. Then there's dolus eventualis. So what is it? That the accused foresaw the possibility that death might result and reconciled themselves to that outcome. So, how can we use the third example? Is we say that if you put somebody in a very, very dangerous position and see that it is a possible outcome, that you get them to deliver huge amounts of money at 3 o'clock in the morning to Alexander Township, wearing gold jewelry and a sign saying, mug me, beat me, it's possible and likely, but it's not guaranteed. In the indirectus case, so that eventualis, meaning it's an eventuality given enough time. Indirectus means it's almost an act of beating somebody to death, where it's very possible if you continued along that route, the person would be crippled or dead. And then directus when you empty your gun in them. Okay. When I say gun, I'm not talking about the extremities. I'm saying 6 shots in the head will do it. Okay, then you've got your mens rea, your culpable homicide. So that's the equivalent to manslaughter. And it's defined as the unlawful, neglectful killing. So it's culpa. So what did they mean by the Latin term culpa? Culpability. You're culpable. So the accused didn't intend to kill. But the problem is he failed to act with the care a reasonable person would have taken in the circumstances. Let me give you an example. Car accidents. If somebody's drank 2 bottles of Johnny Walker and they get in a car, that reckless endangerment is going to cause death when the person's inebriated. Medical negligence leading to somebody's death. Obviously, under certain cases, people can't go under anesthetics, or they didn't check for pre-existing conditions before they performed the surgery. Excessive violence or torture. Eventually, if you waterboard somebody, who knew it was going to go wrong? So basically, in conclusion, actus reus is unlawful killing, or in the case of murder, and in culpable homicide, unlawful killing. Mens rea was the intention, direct, indirect, or eventualis. So that's on the murder case. And on the culpable homicide, it's negligence. There's no foresight, but there should have been. What do you mean? You mean if you if you basically get in a car and you drink excessively, you are going to be uh, responsible. Okay, as far as that's concerned. So what's the key difference if you're looking at a murder? That there has to be a foresight or knowing that death is going to be an eventuality and you proceed anyway. As far as culpable homicide or manslaughter is concerned that they use in America, you didn't intend or foresee death, but you caused it negligently. That's not active beating. That's just taking gross chances. Okay? Like there was a case recently where a parent left a child in a hot car at 48 degrees. You can cook a chicken in that. I don't know what the parents were thinking, but apparently the one parent was smacked out on crack. Okay? Careless mistakes during surgery, sentencing. If you look at sentencing for obviously a murder, life imprisonment, we don't have the death penalty, pity, in South Africa. But the gross negligence is a fine, suspended sentence, or up to 15 years in prison, depending on what sort of factors. What do you mean? So if you look at murder, premeditation will get you the highest sentence in certain states in America, the death sentence. If you kill a child, which is deemed an innocent or a police officer, that generally gets a heavier penalty. Brutality, in other words, torturing somebody to death. When you have two gang members killing each other, they don't feel as much as when you kill an innocent child that gets in the way of a police officer. So obviously premeditation, heavy. When you have manslaughter cases, you've got gross negligence. You've got multiple deaths, prior warnings ignored. Whenever there's a case history, you're going to have a hell of a problem. So the case studies I looked at were from 1993 with Oliveira, Ngubani 1985, Bernadus. So it took me a while just to get to grips with all of these cases, but I think the law system in South Africa has let its people down. Anyway, guys, I thought that was just to put you in the perspective of why, in one case, I see it more from Rabbah's point of view, and in the second case, more from Abaya's point of view. Any questions, guys?
Thanks.
Kevin, you want to teach us? Go for it. You got 3 minutes.
Okay, so this week's parsha is Parshat Balak, where Bilam, the king of the Moabites, commissions Balak to curse the Jewish people because he thinks they're going to cause trouble or they're growing too quickly, etc. So, two halachas we can learn from this parsha. The first one is do not seek the harm of others. So Balak tried to curse the Jewish people, and is 3 times he cursed them, they turned into blessings. Hashem put the speech in his mouth and he turned it around. And practical example relating to this is refrain from spreading rumors about a co-worker or someone that you dislike, because your intention could cause them harm, discredit them financially, socially, etc. Then the second halacha is the importance of brachot, which are called blessings in English, from righteous individuals. And for the non-Jewish nations, Bilam was actually considered a prophet, and he was considered supposedly righteous for them, and he was a wicked person. And as I said earlier, a person who's on that high level of prophecy should only be spiritual and give blessings and give across positivity. And a positive example of that is if you ask a Rov or a Talmud Chacham for a brocha, if you're facing a difficult challenge or situation, such as before surgery, you should do it before, like a surgery or a major business deal or a potentially challenging life issue. That's when it would be ideal to ask for a brocha, and someone maybe a woman is battling to give birth or get pregnant. That's what it's saying. So go find the tzaddikim and ask them for brachot.
Amen. Guys, was the shir okay? Did it make sense? Any feedback? Anything?
No, all great. Thanks.
Yes.
Very good.
Thought that was amazing. Yeah.
All right, look, as long as it made sense, but I
Yeah.
actually wanted to go into all these legal cases, so I found it fascinating in South African law. So it